Science presents exciting news! Is the divorce over? Are spirit and science tying the knot once more? Are the church and the laboratory saying the same thing? Out of the misty ages of antiquity, the quest for the divine and the quest for knowledge about the universe marched hand in hand. Ancient Sumer, there was a god of astronomy, a god of horticulture, a god of irrigation, and the temple priests were the scribes and technologists investigating these fields of knowledge. Ancient Greece, philosophers asking the questions of why are we here, developed the theory of the atom, celestial movements, and human ethics. Medieval Europe, the Western Church arose to a position of supreme power. Kingmaker, landowner, and purveyor of the truth. The Church took it upon themselves to be the one knower of everything. The dogma was law. Yet science had moved forward and now challenged the dogma that the Earth was the center of the universe. Copernicus, Bruno, and Galileo all felt the heavy hand of the Church. But tragedy. Unable to suppress science anymore, the Church and science divided up knowledge and human endeavor. Descartes invented dualism. The Church had the unseen, science the seen, and materialism was born. An uneasy truce. Scientists were no longer being bound, and they reacted with a vengeance. All the unseen is fantasy, delusion. We are strictly little machines running in a predictable machine universe governed by strict immutable laws. The Church pushed back. Soulless scientists were condemned to hell. Darwin countered. The Creator is nothing, nowhere. We are random mutations, simply a carrier of TNA's relentless quest for more in a meaningless universe. And meanwhile, both science and religion were hitting the wall. If everything was mechanistic and God was the holy creator, then what were we humans supposed to do? Science dug ever deeper into a dead universe and stumbled upon and unlocked a mystery. In tiny corners of space and time, scientists found unfathomable energy and mind-numbing mysteries. Mysteries that suggest we are all connected, that the physical universe is essentially non-physical. Time and space are just constructs of this non-materialness. And today, renegade scientists are meeting with religious leaders. Conferences pushing forward a meeting of science and spirit are springing up. As the 20th century blew open the doors of a mechanistic view, will the 21st century blow down the iron wall between the church and laboratory? This is your Is News Real reporter, signing off.
The rabbit hole and how deep and how far we want to go is really how much do you want to discover about your true nature?
Alice went down the rabbit hole where she met the Mad Hatter. Hatter was mad, and the idea was you want to get out of the rabbit hole after you've gone in. So there's two stages to science. There's the crazy part where you go down the rabbit hole, and then there's the part where you check the craziness of your ideas against a rigorous, strict, straitjacket-like process.
I think the interesting thing about science, the interesting thing about physics, is that it is a genuinely new and novel way of trying to come to grips with the world. I think the experimental method, which is important to physics, is a very different business from the method of revelation or the method of meditation or something like that. I don't think it's true that, for example, adherents of, say, Buddhism could imagine changing their beliefs based on the outcomes of some experiments people do with electrons.
Why this apparent rift between the church and science, or between science and religion, emerged today, I think the roots of that are very deep, because it probably goes back to a conviction that some of the books of the scriptures, like the book of Genesis, which deals with the beginnings, is actually telling us about the origins of the world. Now, in fact, any biblical scholar will tell you, and this is not news, that the book of Genesis was never meant to be about the origins of the world. But many churchmen believed that in the book of Genesis you had actual sort of live news, like CNN, about the beginnings of creation. And therefore you had many people down through the ages, like the famous Archbishop James Ussher in Ireland in 1650, who calculated all the ages of the patriarchs back along and worked out to his own satisfaction that the creation of the world occurred in the year 4004 BC on the 17th of September at 9 o'clock in the morning.
I think that there must be a scientific explanation for spirituality. I don't think there's been a good one until recently. To me, the only one that makes sense is that proto-consciousness, Platonic values, goodness, truth, exist at this fundamental level of space-time geometry, which can influence our actions if we're open to them, and interconnects us to all other beings, to the universe at large.
It's time to get wise.
Creates the stories that we live by. And science has told us a very bleak story. It's told us that we're some sort of genetic mistake, that we have genes that use us basically to move on to the next generation, and that we randomly mutate. It's said that we are outside of our universe, that we're alone, that we're separate, and that we're this sort of lonely mistake on a lonely planet in a lonely universe. And that informs our view of the world. It informs our view of ourselves. And we're now realizing that this view of separateness, is one of the most destructive things. It's the thing that creates all the problems in the world.
It's time to get wise.
And we're now realizing that that paradigm is wrong. That we aren't separate. We are all one. We're all together. At the very nethermost element of our being, we are connected. And so we're trying to understand and absorb what are the implications of that. What does this really mean to me in my life?
We need a new spiritual milieu. We need a new spiritual way of understanding the nature of what it is to be a human being. Because the old ways, the old mythologies, the old monarchy, king, God, versus the old lawful scientist way of doing everything are dead. They need to be buried. We need a new realm, a new vision. And I think quantum physics, if anything, could help us get a step up in the right direction.
I think the key aspect of the new paradigm, at least in medicine, which is my little piece, is that consciousness is real and has an impact.
We have to go beyond our senses to create a new paradigm.
It may very well be that what's going on inside of you, in your brain, in your nervous system, in your nature of observation, how memory works, how mind works, it may very well be that what is happening there is some kind of observer-matter interrelationship, which is indeed making things real for you, affecting how you perceive reality. It's not changing the reality out there. It's, you're not changing big chairs and big trucks and bulldozers and rockets taking off. You're not changing those, no. But you're changing how you perceive things, and maybe how you think about the things, how you feel about things, how you sense the world.
The infinite information that the brain is processing every single second tells us that there's more to the world than we're perceiving. However, every single time we're immersed in an experience with our senses, seeing, smelling, tasting, feeling, as we're immersed centrally in our reality.
We know nothing about reality, and all of our sense of so-called reality out there is filtered through our sense organs.
The brain processes 400 billion bits of information a second, but we're only aware of 2,000 of those. That means that reality is happening in the brain all the time.
Try it. How do I know what I'm doing? I and the vase are one. Hey, it might help your work too. I lived through my eyes. Acting in reality.
Not just some nebulous, nothing touchy-feely world of shifting whatevers.
If it's real, I want to see it.
The eyes are, in some senses, a camcorder because they are taking that information and they're storing it, but you're not really able to get it to mean anything until you actually put it all together. So in some senses, it requires the editor's table to really put the whole thing together, to put the movie together of what your life and your world is actually about.
If I get out of bed in the morning, okay, and I suddenly decide to take very seriously the claim, which is surely a true claim, that I don't know for sure if my eyes are working correctly, okay? So that for all I know, even though it looks like there's a stable floor by the side of my bed, there might be a cliff or something like that, okay? If I am unable to order those possibilities in terms of probabilities that I assign to them, then I'm not going to get out of bed. It seems to me I'm paralyzed in the most literal sense of the word, okay? I'm going to have no idea how to literally take the next step. It's definitely the case that we know that my eyes might in principle be deceiving me at any moment. We've had experience of people before subject to hallucinations, and even if we didn't, we don't know how to prove as a fundamental matter that our eyes never deceive us. That's absolutely right. But when we make the decision to get out of bed in the morning, we are assigning probabilities to the various hypotheses compatible with my seeing a floor by the bed. One hypothesis is there really is a floor there, and that's why I'm seeing it. Another hypothesis is my seeing the floor is a hallucination, and there's a cliff there. By getting out of bed in the morning, you endorse one of those hypotheses as more likely than another.
Well, ultimate reality, I think, it very frequently depends a lot on how a person perceives it and what they actually think is the real reality of our world.
If the brain is processing 400 billion bits of information and our awareness is only on 2,000, that means reality is happening in the brain all the time. It's receiving that information, and yet we haven't integrated it. But if we're given knowledge and information outside of convention, outside the box of convention, or say we merge quantum physics and neurophysiology, and the brain is asked to contemplate, or we're asked to contemplate on that, and examine the what-ifs and possibilities and potentials, and associate our knowns with our experience of what we know, and repeat it over and over again, the brain is going to start to integrate two independent neural nets, and it's going to create a new vision. And that new vision is going to be like taking a flashlight and shining it from those 2,000 bits of information that have to do with our body and our environment and time, slightly over in the dark and looking at something new. That's called realization.
You okay? I heard you scream earlier. Was it another dream? You were an Indian, watching Columbus's ship materialize out of thin air. Wow. And this medicine man kept hitting you. Cool. Hey, maybe it was a past life, or a parallel reality, or a future life.
That's weird.
Or maybe that dream was trying to tell you the truth. I guess it just depends on what you think is real. Maybe you should try different anxiety pills.
My pills are fine, okay? Thank you.
Well, I have to go get dressed. I hope you feel better, Amanda.
God, Amanda, I could be such an asshole.
People ask me, why does quantum mechanics matter? given that it's little tiny stuff and who cares? There are three possible answers. From a practical point of view, it doesn't make any difference at all. I mean, you still have to go to work and drive your car and do all the rest of it. From a second point of view, it infiltrates everything in the world, especially the world of electronics. When you go to the supermarket and you do the scanning at the checkout, that's a quantum mechanical effect. But I think the important part is the third one, which is essentially a philosophical issue. Why are philosophers so passionate about deconstructing the assumptions of the world? I finally got it. I got it as a result of looking at quantum mechanics and comparing it to classical mechanics. They present two very different ways of thinking about the way that the world works and about what we are. So from a classical perspective, we are machines. And in machines, there's no room for a conscious experience. It doesn't matter if a machine dies. You can kill the machine. You can throw it in a dump. It doesn't matter. If that is the way that the world is, then people will behave in that way. But there's another way of thinking about the world, which is suggested, it's pointed to by quantum mechanics, which suggested that the world is not this clockwork thing, but it's more like an organism. It's a highly interconnected organismic thing of some type, which extends through space and time. In that kind of environment, what I think and the way that I behave has a much greater impact, not only on myself, but on the rest of the world, than it would if it was a classical world. So from a very basic point of view having to do with morals and ethics, what I think affects the world. That's, I mean, in a sense, that's really the key for why a worldview change is important.
Let's talk about the subatomic world, and then we'll talk about what it's telling us about reality. The first thing I want to tell you about the subatomic world is it's totally a fantasy created by mad physicists trying to figure out what the heck is going on when they do these little experiments. By little experiments, I mean big energy in little spaces and little pieces of time. It gets pretty nutty at that realm of things. And so subatomic physics was invented to try to figure that all out. We need a new science down there. It's called quantum physics, and it is subject to a whole range of debatable hypotheses, thoughts, feelings, intuitions as to what the heck is really going on.
So on the one hand, you had a theory which from the conceptual standpoint was profoundly puzzling, and on the other hand, from the practical standpoint, was vastly more successful than anything we had ever seen before. This is the kind of situation that produces the tension that all of the investigations of foundations of quantum mechanics are feeding off of since then. Because on the one hand, this is an acutely paradoxical, puzzling, conceptually confusing theory. On the other hand, we have no option along the lines of throwing it out or neglecting it because it is the most powerful, proven tool for predicting the behaviors of physical systems that we have ever had in our hands.
The universe is very strange. There seem to be two sets of laws that govern the universe. In our everyday classical world, meaning at roughly our size and time scales, things are described by Newton's laws of motion, set down hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And they work very well for billiard balls and cannonballs and gravity. However, when we get down to a small scale, when we get down to, say, the level of atoms, a different set of laws take over. These are the quantum laws, quantum theory, quantum mechanics. And at that level, particles may be in multiple places at the same time. They may behave as waves smeared out spatially and temporally. They may be interconnected over great distances. They may be unified into one quantum state, into one state, governed by one wave function. And the borderline, the threshold, this curtain between the quantum world and the classical world is really mysterious. It's called sometimes the collapse of the wave function, because in the quantum world, everything is in superposition of multiple possibilities, and in the classical world, these multiple possibilities seem to collapse to particular definite choices, so everything is in one particular place.
Quantum mechanics is really the play and display of information, the play and display of potentiality, waves of information, waves of potential electron. And it's important, the word potential. This isn't the world of electrons, it's the world of potential electrons. But when you have to ask the question, waves of what, really? What is the field that is waving? Is it the ocean? No, it's a universal ocean, an ocean of pure potentiality, an ocean of abstract potential existence. We call it the unified field, or superstring field. And that's what we're made of.
Connectivity among all things is a basic constituent of the fabric of reality. It's very difficult to wrap your mind around that. But Erwin Schrödinger said, he's one of the founders of quantum mechanics, that entanglement, which is this idea of this connectivity, is not just a property of quantum mechanics, it's the property. It's the property of quantum mechanics that makes it very, very strange. And it doesn't seem to fit in with our ordinary world, our ordinary experience, but in fact, it actually does.
You want to shoot some hoops? No, you don't have to be like that. Come on and play. Look, he likes you. Don't you have time for a little one-on-one? How long has it been since you played? Come on, you got the ball. Take a shot. No, my lady, not from there. It's out of bounds. Gotta be on the court to be in play. Welcome to Duke Reginald's court of unending possibilities. Gotta sink the last one.
For her.
It never touched you.
Right.
And it's not solid. Its ball is mostly empty.
We were all taught in school that the world is made of stuff, of matter, of mass, of atoms. Atoms make up molecules, molecules make up materials, and everything is made of that. But atoms actually are mostly empty. For example, if this ball were the nucleus of an atom, a proton in a hydrogen atom, for example, then the electron circling this, which would describe the outer limits of that atom, would be out by that mountain over there, roughly 20 miles away. And everything in between is empty. In fact, the universe is mostly empty. However, when we go down in scale, in the emptiness, we eventually come to a level, the fundamental level of space-time geometry, the fine basement level of the universe, where there's information, there's a pattern. It's called the Planck scale, and it's the fabric of the universe. And at that level, there's information that's been there since the Big Bang. So most of the universe, even of matter, is actually empty.
Most people think that the vacuum is empty. But for internal consistency of quantum mechanics and relativity theory, there is required to be the equivalent of 10 to the 94 grams of mass energy, each gram being E equals mc squared kind of energy. Now that's a huge number, but what does it mean practically? Practically, if I can assume that the universe is flat, and more astronomical data is showing it's pretty darn flat. If I can assume that, then if I take the volume or take the vacuum within a single hydrogen atom, that's about 10 to the minus 23 cubic centimeters. If I take that amount of vacuum and I take the latent energy in that, there is 1 trillion times more energy there than in all of the mass of all of the stars and all of the planets out to 20 billion light years. That's big. That's big. And if consciousness allows you to control even a small fraction of that, creating a Big Bang is no problem.
Organizations like NASA, British Aerospace, are all trying to tap into this incredible unimaginably large energy sea. And they feel if they can tap this, we can travel to different galaxies. So they understand that in empty space, there is this unbelievable energy.
The major basic idea that quantum physics implies, which makes us understand this or even think about this new paradigm, the thing which is that there's this underground, there's got to be a realm of existence which cannot be ever touched on or seen, which bubbles into the existence, giving rise to our understanding of the world.
The tighter physics have tried to grasp onto physical reality, to understand what it's really made of. What are the core building blocks of life? At the basis of it all, life, the universe, slips through your fingers. And you come up with something that's increasingly abstract to come to the realm of pure abstraction. And that's what the unified field is. It's pure abstract potential, pure abstract being, pure abstract self-aware consciousness, which rises in waves of vibration to give rise to the particles, the people, everything we see in the vast universe.
What makes up things are not more things, but what makes up things are ideas, concepts, information.
And like I said, it never touches.
Another strange fact is that objects never really touch each other. When I dribble this ball, the atoms of the ball and the atoms of the ground never actually meet.
So nobody touches nothing. Come on, put your stuff down. Nobody's gonna take it. Like I said, this is my court. It's no problem. How long has it been?
I'll be 8. The first inkling in physics that we got that time ain't what it seemed to be came with relativity. That was the first inkling that time was not absolute. It was not the absolute ruler of the universe. That God Almighty did not say 1 second, 1 second, 1 second, 1 second, 1 meter, 1 meter, 1 meter. You're in a gravitational field. Your head is actually moving at a slightly faster rate than your feet.
The second law of thermodynamics says that things unwind and move forward. So that gives an arrow of time. But at the quantum world, in the micro world, the second law of thermodynamics doesn't seem to hold, and things can go backwards or be timeless.
The fundamental equations of physics have a property which is referred to as time reversal symmetry. And what time reversal symmetry means is that a set of laws, which are time reversal symmetric, are laws that have the following feature. For any process that's in accord with those laws, the same process going backwards is exactly as much in accord with those laws. Okay? That ought to mean that that milk jumps out of coffee as often as it dissolves into it, that people get younger looking as often as they get older looking, that we have the same kind of access vis-a-vis knowledge to the future as we do to the past, that by acting now we ought to be able to influence the past just as much as we can influence the future. All of that is wrong. All of that comes into violent conflict with the way we psychologically experience the world.
One of the most unpalatable ideas still, in spite of the fact that quantum physics has been around a long time, is the possibility or the notion that the future can have a causative effect on the present. We believe that the past can have a causative effect on the present. I hold the ball, I drop it, it falls. Cause, effect when it hits the ground. But could the ground be the cause of my dropping the ball in the first place?
It's only in conscious experience that it seems that we move forward in time. In quantum theory, you can also go backwards in time, and there's some suggestion that processes in the brain related to consciousness project backwards in time. For example, in the late 1970s, a neurophysiologist at University of California, San Francisco, named Ben Libet, did some very famous experiments. What Libet did was study patients who were having neurosurgery on their brains, with their brains exposed, while they were awake. They were given a local anesthetic to numb the area of the skull and scalp to access their brains. and they're awake, and Ben would talk to these people. So, for example, what he did was he would stimulate their little finger and look at the part of the sensory cortex on the opposite side that was related to that, record from it electrically, and ask the patient when he or she felt the stimulus on the little finger. And he would also stimulate at that particular area of cortex. Now, what you would think would be that if you stimulate the little finger, it takes a finite period of time to get to the opposite side of the cortex, so the patient would report it a fraction of a second later after the stimulus. And when you stimulate it directly, the patient would report it immediately. He found just the opposite. When he stimulated the little finger, the patient felt it immediately, and when he stimulated directly in the cortex, there was a delay. After sorting through all the data and repeating this over and over, Libby came to the conclusion that somehow the brain was projecting information backwards in time, so that it did take a finite amount of time to get to the sensory cortex, but the brain projected it backwards in time so that the conscious perception was that the stimulus was felt when the pinch actually occurred.
There have been some studies which have shown that when people are beginning to move a hand or beginning to say something, that there's actually activity in the brain, in certain nerve cells of the brain, even before they become consciously aware of what they're trying to do.
I know it seems to me that I often do things and then decide a fraction of a second later what to do, but I've already done them.
Oh, great. You can always go back in time. What's the matter? Remember, it's empty.
How do you know this shit?
I read Dr. Quantum comics. Everybody thinks it's just kid stuff, but I know it's real. That's how I do my magic on the court.
So, what they taught us in school isn't really the way it is. And that our senses are playing tricks on us. You just gotta wonder, what is this reality that we find ourselves in? Quantum physics says it's all just waves of information. Do I believe that? I hope so. Yikes!
That's how I do my magic on the court.
Yeah, I always choose the Wonder Boy first.
Well, Dr. Quantum says everybody's got it. Everybody's doing it. Doing it constantly. Each and every time you look.
And here we are, the granddaddy of all quantum weirdness. The infamous double slit experiment. To understand this experiment, we first need to see how particles, or little balls of matter, act. If we randomly shoot a small object, say a marble, at the screen, we see a pattern on the back wall where they went through the slit and hit. Now, if we add a second slit, we would expect to see a second band duplicated to the right. Now, let's look at waves. The waves hit the slit and radiate out, striking the back wall with the most intensity directly in line with the slit. The line of brightness on the back screen shows that intensity. This is similar to the line the marbles make. But when we add the second slit, something different happens. If the top of one wave meets the bottom of another wave, they cancel each other out. So now, there is an interference pattern on the back wall. Places where the two tops meet are the highest intensity, the bright lines, and where they cancel, there is nothing. So, when we throw things, that is, matter, through two slits, we get this, two bands of hits. And with waves, we get an interference pattern of many bands. Good so far. Now, let's go quantum. An electron is a tiny, tiny bit of matter, like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream through one slit. It behaves just like the marble, a single band. So, if we shoot these tiny bits through two slits, we should get, like the marbles, two bands. What? An interference pattern. We fired electrons, tiny bits of matter through. But we get a pattern like waves, not like little marbles. How? How could pieces of matter create an interference pattern like a wave. It doesn't make sense. But physicists are clever. They thought, maybe those little balls are bouncing off each other and creating that pattern. So, they decide to shoot electrons through one at a time. There is no way they could interfere with each other. But after an hour of this, the same interference pattern is seen to emerge. The conclusion is inescapable. The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. But mathematically, it's even stranger. It goes through both slits, and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one, and it goes through just the other. All of these possibilities are in superposition with each other. But physicists were completely baffled by this. So they decided to peek and see which slit it actually goes through. They put a measuring device by one slit to see which one it went through and let it fly. But the quantum world is far more mysterious than they could have imagined. When they observed, the electron went back to behaving like a little marble. It produced a pattern of two bands, not an interference pattern of many. The very act of measuring or observing which slit it went through meant it only went through one, not both. The electron decided to act differently, as though it was aware it was being watched. And it was here that physicists stepped forever into the strange, never world of quantum events. What is matter? Marbles or waves? And waves of what? And what does an observer have to do with any of this? The observer collapsed the wave function simply by observing.
We are always the observer. But sometimes we identify with the event so much so that we even lose the aspect of the observer. That's why the materialist gets totally lost and thinks that we could do without the observer.
The physics data tells us that an object itself is really a simplification for what we call out there. One is particularly when we're looking at atomic and subatomic particles or atomic and subatomic matter in any form. What we find is how we go to look at it, what we choose to examine it with, actually changes the properties of what we observe to be out there.
Is this the observer, and which is so intricate to understanding the wacky, weird world of quantum particles and how they react? Is this, then, the observer? And even though we cannot have a quantum field without the observation of scientists who have gone there, who have uncovered it, layer after layer after layer, they're all observers. But not one of them agree conclusively on all points in the field, because they are perceiving the field mathematically from different angles of perception.
We don't know in quantum mechanics how to hook ourselves as observers up with the world. We don't know how to treat ourselves as observers as just another part of the physical system that we're describing. The only way we know how to do quantum mechanics as it's traditionally formulated is to keep the observer outside of the system you're describing. The minute you put him in, you get all these paradoxes. And we're forced to say things in quantum mechanics like, look, the book is doing what it's doing because of quantum mechanics, and I see that because I'm there and I see it, and you better not try to analyze that second part of the sentence in terms of applying quantum mechanics to it because it's going to break down. That's why there are these two separate laws of the evolutions of physical systems. One that applies when you're not looking at them, the other that applies when you are. But that's crazy.
There's no way that we're ever going to mathematize or put into mathematical formula this very act in which a conscious observer comes up with the answer. People say, oh, the measuring instruments, the recorder records it, and there it is. It's on the tape. It's recorded. You forgot one part of the equation. Somebody has to look at the tape. And until somebody looks at the tape, it ain't recorded at all.
When you are not looking, there are waves of possibility. When you are looking, then there are particles of experience.
A particle, which we think of as a solid thing, really exists in a so-called superposition, a spread out wave of possible locations. And it's in all of those at once. The instant you check on it, it snaps into just one of those possible positions.
It's easy to generate situations where the equations of motion will predict that, say, the wave function, the psi of a certain basketball, is uniformly distributed all over the basketball court. We don't have any idea what a state like that would look like. According to the law of quantum mechanics, that's supposed to be a state in which it fails to make any sense even to ask the question, where is the basketball? That is, according to the law of quantum mechanics, asking the question, where is a basketball whose psi is uniformly distributed over a whole basketball court, is the logical equivalent of asking about, say, the marital status of the number 5. Okay? It's not that you don't know the answer, you don't happen to know whether the number 5 is married or a bachelor. It's that the question somehow is radically inappropriate in the first place. The number 5 doesn't have a marital status. There's nothing there to ask about. And similarly, a basketball whose wave function was uniformly distributed over the entire basketball court would not have a position that could even coherently be asked about. Now, the crux of the measurement problem is precisely that, although the Schrödinger equation predicts under certain circumstances which we basically know how to reproduce in the laboratory, that basketballs should go into states like that, states where there fails to be any intelligible fact, any sensible question even about where they are. And yet, when we go look at the basketball court in situations like that, we invariably see either a basketball over here or a basketball over there or a basketball over there. The fact that we see the basketball in some specific location as opposed to seeing it in some science fiction state that we can't even imagine what it looks like, where there fails to be a question about what its location is, the fact that we always see it in some definite location is an explicit violation of these equations of motion, and it's exactly there that the measurement problem comes up.
When you observe, things happen. When you don't, they don't.
Superheroes use superposition, with the world being potential strips of reality, until we choose. Heroes choose what they want, being in many places at once, experiencing many possibilities all at once, and then collapsing on the one. The question is, how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go?
Your own mind is creating multiple possibilities in your subconscious. The superpositions of possibilities are in your subconscious. I mean, you may be consciously aware of them, but they exist, I think, in superposition of multiple possibilities, which after a while will collapse to one or the other.
Project or plan into the future or cast a thought ahead of itself.
Nice shot.
But the great-great-granddaddy of wacky quantum weirdness is entanglement. If time reversal symmetry destroys the notion of time, then entanglement crushes our experience of space. Two objects, two electrons created together, are entangled. Send one to the other side of the universe. Now, do something to one, and the other responds instantly. Instantly. So, Either information is traveling infinitely fast, or, in reality, they are still connected. They are entangled. And since everything was entangled at the moment of the Big Bang, that means everything is still touching. Space is just the construct that gives the illusion that there are separate objects. Are we far enough down the rabbit hole yet?
You now can see in numerous labs around the United States objects that are large enough to be seen by the naked eye, and they are in two places simultaneously. And you can actually take a photograph of that. Now, I suppose if you showed a photograph, they'd say, oh, great, here's this nice blob of colored light, and I see there's a bit of it over here and another bit of it. So you got a picture of two dots. What's the big deal? Superposition is pre-detection. What I was speaking about in the film is post-detection. Now, under normal circumstances, a single object, once it has been detected, is in just one position. However, there are states of matter that have been created now in which objects can be in multiple positions simultaneously, not just two, but actually as many as 3,000 positions. The first of these objects were called Bose-Einstein condensates. And they are single wave functions, meaning they are single particles. But even though they're a single wave function, the wave function has multiple positions. And if you say, well, look right in the chamber. You can see it right there. Oh, I see two things there. You say, no, that's not two things. That's one thing. It's the same thing in two places. Tricky point here is that it's still a single wave function. It's not 3,000 separate wave functions. It's one wave function. So it's one particle. I'm not sure that people's jaw would drop about it because I don't think people really believe it. And I don't mean that people say, oh, you're lying, or oh, the scientists are confused. I think it is so mysterious that you can't even understand how amazing it is. One particle in 3,000 different locations.
Now, if you were to weigh one of them, would it weigh 1/3,000th?
Well, you can't weigh one of them.
Why?
Because it's one particle. It's one indivisible particle.
But if it's in different locations, can't you put a scale under one?
No, it's inseparable. It's not a set. This is the tricky conceptual part that it's not 3,000 separate parts.
Even though it looks that way.
Right. You can look at it, and you can't actually see the one with 3,000, but you can look at the simpler ones, the ones that are 2 or 3 or 4, and you can see, as I say, if you go onto the web, you'll see photographs of these. You'll see these little dots floating in space, and these are the different parts of one object. They're not separable. It's not 4 different objects or 6 different objects. It's one wave function. It's one object.
That's a real brain fart, isn't it? Because when you think about it, you just, wait a minute, no. They're like here. So it's obviously 1, 2, 3.
No, you can't, and you can't pull one away from the others. If you try to pull one away from the others, the entire thing will just disappear. And then furthermore, you've seen Star Trek and whatnot. Beam me up, Scotty.
Beam me up, Scotty.
So it all seems sort of, oh, well, what does that really mean? But you've got to really stop and think about what that means, that it's the same object and it's in 2 places at once. And people tinker in the lab and they get angry about things and they have lunch and they go home and they lead their lives just as though nothing utterly astounding is happening, because, of course, that's how you have to go about it. And yet there is this completely amazing magic sitting right in front of your eyes.
I've got a studio full of people, but oh my God, there's no photographer.
we took two simple black boxes like this. Inside is a very simple electric circuit with a few diodes, oscillator, EEPROM, some resistors and capacitors. Basically, that's it. We wrap one in aluminum foil. We put it in an electrically grounded Faraday cage. The other we set on a tabletop around which four very well qualified meditators, highly inner self-managed individuals sit. And they go into a deep meditative state. They cleanse the environment. They make it essentially a sacred space using their mind cleansing procedures and their intentions. And then one of the four speaks the specific intention for this device. The intention is to influence a particular target experiment. Might be to increase the pH of purified water by 1 full pH unit, or to decrease the pH by 1 full pH unit. We've used these devices on all those experiments and have been robustly successful. In the meditative process, then after one speaks the particular intention, it's held various ways by the four for maybe 15 minutes, and then so be it, it's let go. And then a subsidiary intention is stated to seal that imprint into the device. We take one of these devices with its aluminum foil, we put it in a soft package, we put it in a FedEx packet, we ship it 2,000 miles away to the laboratory we were using up in Minnesota. And as soon as it arrives there, it goes into its own electrically grounded Faraday cage. The next day we do the same with the control. The experiment is running, and basically then one just takes the device out, sets it beside the experiment within 6 inches to a foot, and turns it on for a period of time. That's it. Now, we learned over some period of time that there was another factor. We found that the use of these, we call them intention imprinted electrical devices, the continued use of this somehow conditions the space to some higher level of symmetry. And we start getting new phenomena. That is, the devices work. That is, the pH, which is normal, starts rising 1 full pH unit, if that was the imprint, or starts dropping. If you go 1 full pH unit or beyond, you're dead. I mean, that's what it means to a human.
REG machines, random event generators, are electronic tosses of the coin.
One type of random number generator experiment that's been conducted many, many times, hundreds of times, over the past 4 decades or so, since around the 1960s, has been a random generator that only produces sequences of random bits, zeros and ones, like flipping coins. And you would simply ask somebody to press a button, it would produce 200 bits. And you would ask them to say, well, try to make it produce more 1 bits than 0 bits. And when you take the entire body of literature, all of the hundreds of experiments that have been done, you can ask a single question. Did it matter that people were trying to push it towards ones or push it towards zeros? And the overall answer is yes, it does matter. That somehow intention is correlated with the operation, with the output of these random number generators, such that if you wish for more ones, somehow the generators produce more ones.
So when they talk about in quantum physics being a completely arbitrary and random process, what they're not accounting for is the extraordinary effect of human thought, of human intention.
When the O.J. Simpson trial was going on, lots of people were watching television because of the courtroom drama that was unfolding. And Radin intuited that there must be a lot of intention going on at the time when the courtroom drama is strong. So he hired a bunch of psychologists who kept track of the courtroom drama. At the same time, Radin was studying the behavior of random number generators. But then Radin found that whenever the intentions were strong in the courtroom, that's when the deviation of these random number generators from randomness becomes very high.
This leads naturally to wonder, are people affecting the world of reality that they see? You betcha they are. Every single one of us affects the reality that we see, even if we try to hide from that and play victim. We all are doing it.
Just tell me where you are. Okay, good. But hurry, will you please, because these models are giving me a headache.
10 minutes.
terribly interested in the molecular structure of water and what affects it. Now, water is the most receptive of the four elements. Mr. Emoto thought perhaps it would respond to non-physical events. So he set up a series of studies, applied mental stimuli, and photographed it with a microscope.
For one sample of water, we drop about 0.5 cc's onto each 50 petri dishes. Then we take those 50 petri dishes and freeze them in a freezer at minus 25 degrees Celsius for about 3 hours. We take those frozen samples into a refrigerator that is set at minus 5 degrees Celsius, where a microscope with a camera is set up. There we take photographs of each of the 50 water drops individually. We first take photographs of water that we did not put any information in. Then we take the water with information and do the same procedure just described. We take those before and after photographs and compare the differences. When we projected the feeling of love and thanks to water, it made the most beautiful crystal. Times like this, I think water is at peace.
This first picture is a picture of water from the Fujiwara Dam. And this picture is the same water after receiving a blessing from a Zen Buddhist monk. Now, in this next series of pictures, Mr. Emoto printed out words, taped them to bottles of distilled water, and left them out overnight. This first photograph is a picture of the pure distilled water, just the essence of itself. These subsequent photographs, as you can see, are each different. This is the chi of love. And we move along here to thank you. And you can see where he taped that to this bottle here. But if you read Japanese, you already knew that. Now, Mr. Emoto speaks of the thought or intent being the driving force in all of this. The science of how that actually affects the molecules is unknown, except to the water molecules, of course. And it's really fascinating when you keep in mind that 90% of our bodies are water.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? If thoughts can do that to water, imagine what our thoughts can do to us.
One of the most interesting experiments with random event generators occurred when it was really out of time. Some of the Princeton investigators and some of the other ones decided that they would try to see whether or not you could affect a random machine after it had run. So they converted it, instead of having a computer with a visual screen, they had a computerized situation that was audio tapes. And they had it with clicks in the left ear and clicks in the right ear. And they already played this with nobody listening to it, so that it already ran. They put that in the vault, and they then gave the tape, the already run tape, to a participant and said, take it home, I want you to listen to it, and I want you to make more left ear clicks than right ear clicks with it. Send your intention to it. So the person did. They handed back the tape, and they played it, and lo and behold, and they played the one in the vault too, and they discovered that they were both the same, and they both had more left clicks than right clicks. So what was going on here? Well, it wasn't as though the person who was the participant had actually affected it at the moment he was listening to it. His thoughts and his attention had moved back down the timeline and affected it at the moment it was generated.
Most people don't affect reality in a consistent, substantial way because they don't believe they can.
Whatever way we observe the world around us is what comes back to us. And the reason why my life, for instance, is so lacking in joy and happiness and fulfillment, is because my focus is lacking in those same things exactly. If we're victims, we should ask ourselves, have I a victim mentality? If I'm continually meeting misfortunes and accidents and tragedies, maybe it's because my mentality is basically attuned to accepting that this is the way life is, and so it happens. Now, why can I not achieve those things? Fundamentally through lack of focus.
The average person loses their attention span every 6 to 10 seconds per minute.
When one wants to focus, intent, you want to be a singleness of mind. That's why some of the old occult teachings teach people to focus on a flame, a match flame, in fact, so that you learn to bring your attention into a very sharp channel so that the energy density becomes greater.
The mind is structured in layers, just like the universe is structured in layers, from superficial to profound. And if we use the mind at a very superficial level of ordinary thought, we have very limited power. We can barely move a speck of dust across a tabletop without using our hands. So weak can consciousness be. But at the deepest level of consciousness, consciousness creates universes.
But we always wonder then, don't we? When we wish for all of those, to be able to heal with the touch and to raise the dead and to manifest a loaf of bread in our hand. And we always wonder why we can't do that, but we can never ask a question that we don't already know the answer to. And the answer is because we don't believe we could do it, and it interferes with our agenda of our own personal addictions that define us. We have never had enough time to care for anyone else other than our own emotional addictive needs.
Hey, how was the shoot? Solid. Your boss called. He's worried about you. Amanda, I want to thank you for letting me stay here. I know I'm a bit much sometimes and that it's been tough after Bob and all. And you've just been so wonderful. I mean, I make a mess and, well, I clean up afterwards, but it's not really your style.
Sometimes I think you make me sane.
Me? The day I make someone sane, they're in trouble. Anyway, I made you something as a thank you gift. Open it. I went through your pictures and picked my favorite ones. And it took me forever because there's so many good ones. That's for all the wonderful photos you will be taking. Oh.
I've had a strange day. Thank you.
Why are we here?
If thoughts can do that to water, imagine what our thoughts can do to us.
What thoughts are made of? Is there a substance of thought?
this is a dream that I'm dreaming. Just as in a dream, you dream different characters can emerge and come out to you and talk to you and meet you and so forth. It's possible to go to another level of dreaming where you can become each of the characters that you dream.
Go backward and forward in time.
Time is relative.
Goes backwards in time and forward in time to bring information.
Time reversal symmetry. Of course we can go backward and forward in time.
Generators occurred
Are
when it was
all realities in the quantum field existing simultaneously?
The actual event of experience. There literally are different worlds in which we live. There's the macroscopic world that we see. There's the world of our cells. There's the world of our atoms. There's the world of our nuclei. These are each totally different worlds. They have their own language. They have their own mathematics. They're not just smaller. Each is totally different, but they're complementary. Because I am my atoms, but I am also my cells. I'm also my macroscopic physiology. It's all true. They're just different levels of truth. The deepest level of truth uncovered by science and by philosophy is the fundamental truth of unity. At that deepest subnuclear level of our reality, you and I are literally one.
This gradually led into some notions that there was an invisible connection between everything. Physicists give this a name. They call it entanglement.
As Einstein put it, he didn't believe that quantum mechanics could be true because it required that there be spooky action at a distance. That was his term. And what he meant is that when we have our ordinary sense of the way that the fabric of reality is, it seems like these two places are absolutely in space, they're separate, and never the twain shall meet. But in fact, it's not true. At some deeper level that we can't see with our eyes very clearly, two places in space are the same. They are co-located, coexisting. So if we imagine that common sense, the way common sense literally meaning that your senses tell you about the world, if that's the way the world is actually constructed, then things like psychic and mystical experience don't make any sense at all. Because the whole point about psychic and mystical experience that makes them strange is the sense that there's some kind of connection between what's going on inside your head and things elsewhere in space and in time. So what this view of quantum mechanics provides is a way of framing what these strange experiences are like. And it reframes it from somehow magically information is getting inside my head from signals or forces or something into a different view, which is that in a sense your head, yes, is here, but it's also spread out through space and time. And so when I'm able to get a telepathic impression from somebody at a distance, it's not because I somehow jumped out there and got it, but because at some deep level, my head and the other person's head are co-located.
We become entitled all the time when we communicate telepathically. Those experiences are so striking. I literally can read your thoughts if I become entangled with you. And such things happen. There are distant viewing experiments. There are even experiments now that you are seeing light flashes and your brain potential picks up the signature of those light flashes, what is called evoke potential, that can be measured in an EEG machine connected to your brain. And I am sitting over there, no light flashes, I cannot see you, and still my brain potentials, because I am correlated with you in terms of intention, I intend to be directly communicative with your experiences. That intention gives me the capability of simultaneously having the similar brain potential in my brain. It was first done by Jacobo Greenberg at the University of Mexico and now repeated by Peter Fenwick in London.
The day should be the sunrise. It should be the beginning of great thought.
I wake up in the morning and I consciously create my day the way I want it to happen. Now sometimes, because my mind is examining all the things that I need to get done, it takes me a little bit to settle down and get to the point of where I'm actually intentionally creating my day. But here's the thing, when I create my day, and out of nowhere, little things happen that are so unexplainable, I know that they are the process or the result of my creation. And the more I do that, the more I build a neural net in my brain that I accept that that's possible. gives me the power and the incentive to do it the next day.
And we all create our own realities. And we do that because we are the observer. We are each the own observer of our own reality. And each of our individual consciousnesses creates our own individual reality in the most amazing way. My son, Evan, the physicist, says, it's an additive thing. I mean, if I'm holding one reality and someone else is holding another reality. I mean, it's the Super Bowl this afternoon. And the reality that the Eagles are holding is a different reality than what the Patriots are holding. And only one of those realities are going to be the real reality. So there's some additive, and there are interference patterns.
Well, I think if we keep quantum physics and the understanding very simple for the layperson, that our observation has a direct effect on our world. I think if we keep it very simple, then people can get about the business of beginning to practice the skill of observation. See, the subatomic world responds to our observation, but the average person loses their attention span every 6 to 10 seconds per minute. So that doesn't leave a lot of room for our attention span. So how can the very large respond to someone who doesn't have the ability to even focus and concentrate? Maybe we're just poor observers. Maybe we haven't mastered the skill of observation, and maybe it is a skill. And maybe we're so addicted to the external world and so addicted to the stimulus and response to the external world that the brain is beginning to work out of response instead of out of creation. If we're given the proper knowledge and the proper understanding and given the proper instruction, we should begin to see measurable feedback in our life. If you make the effort to sit down and design a new life, and you make it the most important thing, and you spend time every day feeding it like a gardener feeds a seed, you will produce fruit.
We are running the holodeck. We are collectively, it's there, it has such flexibility that anything you can imagine it will create. And you learn, your intention causes this thing to materialize once you're conscious enough.
Yes, so what is consciousness?
What is consciousness?
Well, consciousness is a very difficult thing to define.
What is consciousness? Where does it come from?
People have been trying to explain consciousness and try to figure out what exactly it is, what it means for us as human beings, why we even have it. On a simple way of defining it is it has to do with awareness, and in particular it has to do with awareness of the self. That's at least how we as human beings have self-consciousness, so that when we look in a mirror we recognize that it's ourselves that we're looking at and not some other person or some other animal.
And do you think science will understand that better than having to handle a hot potato called consciousness that has so much cultish religion, backwater voodoo attached to it?
Consciousness has been left out of the equations of physics in general, as well as quantum physics, for a very simple reason. It's easier to do things that way.
Buddy, come on, Frank.
This is a good assignment, if you'd see it that way.
What to see? I do. They did.
Oh, God, Amanda. You live in your past. Everything with you is about what happened. You hate churches. You hate weddings. You hate guys.
Consciousness, we have great trouble defining it. To me, consciousness is a byproduct of spirit entering dense matter. But we have a long, long way to grow before we get to the stage where it is meaningful for us to ask the question, will we know God?
Most people think of God as that great figure in the sky with the white beard who's scrutinizing the human race from above. They see us here on earth as in some form of neutral testing ground, where we're placed by God for a period, and God watches from above, registering the scores on his laptop as to whether we perform according to his designs or whether we're offending him, as it's put. An absolutely outrageous idea. How could we offend God, the type of God that people believe in? How could it matter so much to him? How could it, above all, matter that he would find it so serious a situation that he could condemn us to an eternity of suffering? These are bizarre ideas, but obviously they have a great hold on the fears and the limitations and the insecurities of people, which is why religion can play so effectively, whether deliberately or otherwise, on those insecurities. People fall into line very readily when they're threatened by these cosmic sentences of everlasting punishment.
How in the Ten Commandments could we have possibly created a mind that could transcend space and time? No, we're too busy keeping our emotions in check to ever dream of infinite possibilities. And maybe that is the ultimate conspiracy.
Even though a given person may have long ago thrown off the trappings of religion, they still live in the religious mold and they don't even know it. But their whole conception of how reality works is all something that has been molded by religion. So until you get that out of your system, you can't ever make go of an evolutionary perspective.
One of the problems with organized religions is that there is this sense of separateness, that it's only good to be a Protestant, or that people who are Catholics are the only people who know the way. And I think now our current understanding of quantum physics is this understanding of complete unity, and so that we have to derive our spirituality from a sense of unity.
This is the basic journey of spirituality. When we ask the question, why am I feeling separate all the time?
Speaking of God always conjures up the idea of the old guy with the white beard in the cloud, judging, observing, punishing, rewarding, or giving commands. Once you're on that track, you're totally off the path of spiritual evolution and development. The great appeal of all to people who don't want to grow up, but want the great parent in the skies looking after them, is to ask Jesus to do it for me. If only I place my trust in Jesus, he will save me from my sins and look after me, and all will be well. Well, Jesus cannot eat my lunch for me, and Jesus cannot be born for me, and neither can Jesus save me. Because what we're talking about in this, in real terms, is not being saved by anyone, God or otherwise. We are talking about a personal evolution.
The only reason that there is an addiction to religion is some way out of a mistake. Does that diminish the greatness of God? No. It actually opens the corral and lets God be eternal, absolute. The law that is given to us is the same laws given to those people on Sirius. They're given to us by the people in the Rose universe or the I universe. You know, and your Hubble telescope has finally seen galaxies of immeasurable beauty, that in our heart and in our mind we long to engage. It's exciting to meet beings of greater mind or lesser mind. And where does it end? It doesn't end. It doesn't end.
We do not want to accept responsibility. We do not want to accept our greatness. So it's very easy for any system of thought, religious or otherwise, that comes along. It's very easy to play on that, to play on our insecurities, to assure us all is well, we'll all be taken care of. We lap that up. So don't blame religion. Blame our own insecurities, which has allowed religion to flourish and which has allowed so many systems of thought that are disempowering to flourish throughout human history. That's why we can't get out of it.
I now present to you Mr. and Mrs. Richard Buck Filipowski.
Experiencing something in the present day that is a trigger to something that is very emotionally charged for us. So now we have become even more disconnected from the reality of what actually is.
The new dream, like a thunderstorm in our brain, and its electrical strikes through our synaptic skies to the earth of our being, creates a chemical cascade in our body that prepares our body for conquest, achievement, a relishing experience emotionally. But we would have no conquest. Indeed, we would have no relishment if we had not first had that hologram and those chemicals that made us, or rather changed us, from being fearful entities into fearless entities after a dream. The frontal lobe is the crowning achievement of the human brain. Frontal lobe. This frontal lobe allows us a distinguishedness to change our minds.
Through the workings of the nervous system and the particular way that it implements quantum effects. Very distinct, specific way, not general, not fuzzy, not imprecise. That it absolutely does open the door for free will being a possibility that does not violate modern scientific tenets, and that's consistent to a certain extent with people's subjective impression that we do have free will.
What separates us from all other species is the ratio of our frontal lobe to the rest of the brain. The frontal lobe is an area of the brain that's responsible for firm intention, for decision making, for regulating behavior, for inspiration. It is the seat of what causes us to take information from our environment and process it and store it in our brain to make decisions or choices that are different than the decisions and choices that we've made in the past. The brain is made up of tiny nerve cells called neurons. These neurons have tiny branches that reach out and connect to other neurons to form a neural net. Each place where they connect is integrated into a thought or a memory. Now, the brain builds up all its concepts by the law of associative memory. For example, ideas, thoughts, and feelings are all constructed and interconnected in this neural net, and all have a possible relationship with one another. The concept and the feeling of love, for instance, is stored in this vast neural net. But we build the concept of love from many other different ideas. Some people have love connected to disappointment. When they think about love, they experience the memory of pain, sorrow, anger, and even rage. Rage may be linked to hurt, which may be linked to a specific person, which then is connected back to love.
Every observation can be looked upon as a quantum measurement. This quantum measurement produces memory. We always perceive something after reflection in the mirror of memory. It is this reflection in the mirror of memory that gives us that sense of I-ness, who I am.
The brain does not know the difference between what it sees in its environment and what it remembers, because the same specific neural nets are then firing. We know physiologically that nerve cells that fire together wire together. If you practice something over and over again, those nerve cells have a long-term relationship. If you get angry on a daily basis, if you get frustrated on a daily basis, if you suffer on a daily basis, if you give reasons for the victimization in your life, you're rewiring and reintegrating that neural net on a daily basis, and that neural net now has a long-term relationship with all those other nerve cells called an identity. We also know that nerve cells that don't fire together no longer wire together. They lose their long-term relationship. because every time we interrupt the thought process that produces a chemical response in the body, every time we interrupt it, those nerve cells that are connected to each other start breaking the long-term relationship. If we practice our mental rehearsal and our skill in being able to do it will show that certain brain circuits will grow as a result of our effort. It'll get easier to do, in other words. If we accept that idea, then it will allow us to go back the next day and do it with more certainty and with more acceptance. That in itself is no different than praying. You see, there's no religious text that says thought doesn't matter. There's no religious text that doesn't say your prayer and your intention shouldn't be answered by God. But explaining how that happens is what quantum physics and the observer is all about. But still, when we can make thought more real than anything else, our brain is designed to do that. The frontal lobe, with its enormous space, is the altar in which we place a thought. And it gives us the permission to hold the thought for an extended period of time, and it lowers the volume to the external stimuli. We lose track of time and space. That's the moment we're stepping into the quantum field. That's the moment that now we're making thought more real than anything else. We are physically, chemically, emotional human beings. That's not a bad thing. It only becomes a limitation when we keep accessing those same emotions and those same attitudes on a daily basis and go nowhere in terms of our change or evolution in our life.
How can we say that we have lived fully every day? By simply experiencing the same emotions that we're addicted to every day. What we're actually saying is, I have to reconfirm who I am and my personality is, I have to do this, I have to go here, I have to be that. A master is quite a different cat. It is one that sees the day as an opportunity in time to create avenues of reality and emotions that are unborn, of realities that are unborn, that the day becomes a fertilization of infinite tomorrows.
There's a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is like a little mini factory, and it is a place that assembles certain chemicals that match certain emotions that we experience. Those particular chemicals are called peptides. They're small chain amino acid sequences. The body's basically a carbon unit that makes about 20 different amino acids all together to formulate its physical structure. In the hypothalamus, we take small chain proteins called peptides, and we assemble them into certain neuropeptides or neurohormones that match the emotional states that we experience on a daily basis. So there's chemicals for anger, and there's chemicals for sadness, and there's chemicals for victimization, there's chemicals for lust. There's a chemical that matches every emotional state that we experience. And the moment that we experience that emotional state in our body or in our brain, that hypothalamus will immediately assemble the peptide that then releases it through the pituitary into the bloodstream. The moment it makes it into the bloodstream, it finds its way to different centers or different parts of the body. Now, every single cell in the body has these receptors on the outside.
And one cell can have thousands of receptors studying its surface, kind of opening up to the outside world. And when a peptide docks on a cell, it literally, like a key going into a lock, sits on the receptor surface and attaches to it and kind of moves the receptor, and kind of like a doorbell buzzing, sends a signal into the cell.
It's party time!
What happens in adulthood is that most of us who've had our glitches along the way are operating in an emotionally detached place, or we're operating as if today were yesterday.
What is it?
Mixed.
Change in itself means then that we have to abandon our old self. It means that we have to leave behind our identity for a few moments and begin to speculate who we could be. To change means modifying our behavior enough so that it's permanent.
Our experiences color what we know. So there is no completely objective appraisal of anything, because our appraisal of everything has to do with our previous experiences and our emotions. Everything has an emotional weighting to it.
We've gone from emotions being these spiritual, immaterial things to things, they're not even things, to actual molecules with molecular weights and peptides with sequences and structures.
Science knows now that the hypothalamus makes neuropeptides, and those neuropeptides are strong chemicals.
Well, here's the story of the peptide in the cell. The peptides find the receptors and dock onto them and stay attached. Then they come off, and then they can come back on again. And while they're there, they are changing the cell. A receptor that has a peptide sitting in it sets off a whole cascade of biochemical events, some of which changes the nucleus of the cell. Each cell is definitely alive, and each cell has a consciousness, particularly if we define consciousness as the point of view of an observer. There is always the perspective of the cell. The cell knows where it is, the cell knows where it's going, the cell knows what proteins it's making, the cell knows whether it's about to divide or whether it's in a program to stop dividing. In fact, the cell is the smallest unit of consciousness in the body.
I'm hungry.
The cells are yelling up to the brain saying, "Hungry! We haven't gotten our fix today." And it's going to start sending impressions to the brain, and the brain is going to start to formulate imagery. It's going to sound like voices in our head.
I'm hungry.
To think of a reason why we should be depressed. Think of a reason why we should be confused. Think of a reason for our own suffering. And the body is going to be telling the brain that it's not getting its chemical needs met. And so the brain will then activate and start going to our past situations and flashing pictures to our frontal lobe.
Oh yeah! We've commandeered an entire serving planet! Yeah! Keep it coming! Keep it coming! Oh yeah!
Well, my definition of an addiction is something really simple. Something that you can't stop. We bring to ourselves situations that will fulfill the biochemical craving of the cells of our body by creating situations that meet our chemical need.
It always happens to me. Every day.
So my definition really means that if you can't control your emotional state, you must be addicted to it.
Oh, it's ruined everything.
The people that we really love are people who are willing to share our emotional needs, our feelings, whatever they are. Whether they are sexual, whether they are victimized, poor me, poor you, whether they are power, you need somebody to control you so you feel like you're in control.
No, ma'am, don't dip your half-eaten shrimp back into the cocktail sauce.
Screw you and your health codes. I am the bride's sister. I'll stick my ass in the cocktail sauce if I damn well please.
Come on. I want you to get out there and serve. Make sure everybody has a full fun. Sweet you won't do anything about it.
Me show you what women want!
What is reality?
What is reality?
What is reality?
How do we know there's reality? They have taken laboratory animals and they've hooked up electrodes in certain parts of their brain that produce those neuropeptides. And those neuropeptides are such strong chemicals that, given the fact that they train the laboratory animal to press a lever to get that chemical release, that neuropeptide release, it would choose the neuropeptide release more than hunger, more than sex, more than thirst, more than sleep. As a matter of fact, it went to the point of physical exhaustion and collapsed before it would take care of itself physically. And that's really what stress does to our body. We become so addicted to the stress in our lives that we can't quit our job, even though it doesn't serve us. We can't leave our relationship because it doesn't serve us. We can't make choices because the stimulus and responses produce the chemistry that clouds our choices, and we're no different than the dog who lacks its ability to make choices because of its smaller frontal lobe.
So how can anyone really say they're in love with a specific person, for example? They're only in love with the anticipation of the emotions they're addicted to. Because the same person could fall out of favor the next week by not complying.
No. You got the punchline wrong. It's a photographer's joke. Go on about your music. Are you okay?
Right, I thought that couldn't help me some girl.
When?
Just now.
I was with the groom.
Hey, I can read it.
I was with the groom just now. Yeah, he loves Paulette. Where? Polacks, they all look the same in a tux.
Everybody secretly is an adventurer. Everybody loves the adventure. It's just taking that first step. And once they have the moment of insight, that moment of insight carries frequency. It carries a message. The cells of the body are enlivened by possibility. They're enlivened by unknown potentials. They're enlivened by a future history or future opportunity that may be down the rabbit hole a little further. And if they allow themselves to experience the quandary and the mysticism and the possibility that when they emerge from the rabbit hole, they're a different person. And now they go back into their world. And because they've processed that information and left footprints in the mind and in the brain, their perception of the world will never be the same.
How can we say that we have lived fully every day by simply experiencing the same emotions that we're addicted to every day? A master is quite a different cat.
Another drink?
It is one that sees the day as an opportunity in time to create avenues of reality and emotions that are unborn, that the day become infinite tomorrows.
To the groom!
To the groom.
What's up, guys?
What's up, man?
Hello. What do we need?
Some boxes. Put out! Yeah, baby!
Yes, it's a psychosomatic network, and yes, some of us, particularly adolescent boys, are, under the control of lower centers. The eye isn't in control of the molecules of emotion. It's more, I don't want to say at the mercy of it, but these rapid eye movements that help us decide where to focus are mediated in the midbrain, and you can map opiate receptors there and receptors for many of the other peptides. So once again, the relevant search command that's going on is related to finding a certain emotional state.
Oh, God. She wouldn't fall for me. No.
Oh, mama! Woo! What the hell are you waiting for? Come on, you little pussies! Jeez, I can't believe you guys! What are you? Ooh, come on, just get the hell out of the way! Hi there, honey! Come on, baby, you know you want it. Oh, don't give me that look.
What about people who are addicted to sex?
Actually, sex itself is an invention to allow us to see into the future. Think about that for a while.
Hello there, big boy.
Is there a rocket in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?
I want to hear some polka music, okay?
I'm gonna play
These
the
people
polka
want to hear
music.
some
I know
polka
they're gonna
music.
play the-
You can't have a Polish wedding without polka music!
No, would you leave it alone? Keep your
How can you have a Polish wedding without any Polish music?
hands off my equipment!
It ain't a Polish wedding without a polka!
Our mind literally creates our body.
But it all starts in the cell. And who gives the cells the order? The orders come from the neural net in our brain, which are based on the experiences and information that we've logged in there. And we use a certain box of solutions to our life that causes chemistry to take place. So in order for us to change the chemistry, we would literally have to change the neural net, which means we'd have to change our identity, which means we'd have to change our attitude, or change the way in which we interact with our environment. And every time we keep being the same person and keep experiencing the same attitudes, all we're doing is reinforcing ourselves as our identity.
I once did a little gig in a woman's prison they're all heroin addicts, and by teaching them that they have receptors for the heroin, and that the more heroin that they take, their ability to make their own internal endorphins, their own internal heroin, basically starts to decline. And then the receptors start to become subsensitive, or there's actually less of them. So there's these actual changes, and then this new information about how less brain cells are being made, so that people get kind of, in all addictions, they get stuck in old patterns.
The person's mental life becomes dominated by pain, such that everything that they perceive is colored by the pain. And sometimes every way that they react and everything that they do becomes all about their pain.
One of the things about receptors is they change in their sensitivity. If a given receptor for a given drug or internal juice is being bombarded for a long time at a high intensity, it will literally shrink up. There will be less of them, or it will be hooked up in such a way that it is desensitized or downregulated. So the same amount of drug or internal juice will elicit a much smaller response.
If we're bombarding the cell with the same attitude and the same chemistry over and over again on a daily basis, when that cell finally decides to divide, when it produces a sister cell or a daughter cell, that next cell will have more receptor sites for those particular emotional neuropeptides and less receptor sites for vitamins, minerals, nutrients, fluid exchange, or even the release of waste products or toxins. Now, all aging is a result of improper protein production. What happens when we age? Our skin loses elasticity. Well, elastin is a protein. What happens to our enzymes? We don't digest as well. What happens to our synovial fluid? Those are proteins. They become brittle and stiff. What happens to our bones? They become thin. So all aging is a result of improper protein production. So then the question arises, does it really matter what we eat? And does nutrition really have an effect if the cell doesn't even have the receptor sites after 20 years of emotional abuse to even receive or let in the nutrients that are necessary for its health?
If we know the thoughts of a person, we will best know them by their addiction, their continuous, over 24 hours, in a continuum of what emotions they display in their body. We shall know their thoughts.
I hate you.
We never, ever reincarnate to the I love you so much people. We always reincarnate to the situations of why we hate ourselves.
Hate you. You get it? You suck! Look at you! You're ugly! You're worth nothing! You get it all! I hate you!
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If thoughts can do that to water, imagine what our thoughts can do to us.
No one has ever came along and ever given you sufficient, intelligent knowledge about your beautiful self, how you work from the inside out. Why do you have addictions? Because you have nothing better. You have dreamt of nothing better because no one has ever taught you how to dream better.
There's data now that when people are addicted to whether it's cocaine, heroin, nicotine, alcohol, all of them seem to share a property of blocking the growth of new brain cells. And yet, it can completely come back when the drug taking has stopped.
Oh, poopy.
If you don't see the traps, you have to go through the crap until you see the traps. Because if you don't see it, it's your only teaching machine. It's your only way for you to come to understand something new. So the universe brings these things to your door, and there is learning in them for you if you are willing to reflect upon them and think beyond the rigid mindset.
Can I? Wow. Borrow some toothpaste? Thanks.
When I talk about we disappearing, I don't mean that we physically disappear. What I mean is that we move out of the area of the brain that has to do with our personality, that has to do with our association to people, our association to places, our association to things and times and events. We don't exist in the associative centers in our brain that reaffirms our identity and reaffirms our personality.
We now have science to back up what our thoughts do and how they make our bodies weak. A lot of scientists who are actually studying this with behavioral kinesiology and other ways, showing that thoughts make your body weak. And thoughts pretty much create your reality. They create what you're going to think about yourself. If you're fat but you think you're wonderful, you'll be wonderful. But most women we're compared all the time with impossible images from Barbie to models. And so we think that our whole currency is how we look and how other people are going to perceive us. And we're always up against impossible standards.
What is relative to their own emotional addiction are movies and dramas and news and all the media that is so beautiful today and providing people with experiences without having to be there. And yet, That does not define human greatness.
They're so hypnotized by their environment through the media, through television, through people living and creating ideals that everybody struggles to become, that no one can actually become in terms of physical appearance and definitions of beauty and valor that are all illusions, that most people surrender and live their life in mediocrity. And they may live that life, and the soul may never really, their desire may never really rise to the surface, so they may want to be something else. But if it does rise to the surface, and they ask themselves if there is something more, or why am I here? What is the purpose of life? Where am I going? What happens when I die? They start to ask those questions. They start to flirt and interact with the perception that they may be having a nervous breakdown. And in reality, what they're doing is that their old concepts of how they viewed their life in the world start to fall apart.
That's why very few people make this journey, because it's deeply unsettling. All of the molds that we have lived by have to be broken, and we have to liberate ourselves in this way. And sometimes there's an awkward period between the comfort that we knew before and the real state of comfort when we are the Lord of our being, which follows that interval of chaos. Most people, when they get into the chaos, give up hope and go back to the old, false securities. They get to live a reasonable life, and they get to die in some sort of peace, but they haven't advanced spiritually at all in that experiment that we call the life.
We're in completely new territory in our brain. And because we're in completely new territory, we're rewiring the brain, literally reconnecting to a new concept. Then ultimately, it changes us from the inside out. If I change my mind, will I change my choices? If I change my choices, will my life change? Why can't I change? What am I addicted to? What will I lose that I'm chemically attached to? And what person, place, thing, time, or event that I'm chemically attached to that I don't want to lose because I may have to experience the chemical withdrawal from that. Hence the human drama.
This life is but a page in an enormous book in which we will always be who we are, but always with the inherent needling of ambitious pursuit, a pursuit that takes us from the boring tedium of self-reflection, of self-hate, and to self-creation of new dreams. And we are ambitious gods. It's the only planet in the Milky Way that has habitation that is steeped in enormous subjugation of religion. You know why that is? Is because people have set up right and wrong.
I did say there is no right and wrong. Does that mean that it's a free-for-all? Absolutely not. I mean, the problem that I have with right and wrong in those categories is not that I want a free-for-all, but that right and wrong doesn't go nearly far enough.
They have never sinned. They have never wronged. Wronged, yes, in moral confrontations with society. But that's their adversity. That's why they're here. To wrong, to learn, to search, and use the wisdom of that to create yet greater dreams.
There's nobody keeping records up there. The records are here, and I'm going to have to deal with them. That's far more painful than a record-keeping God up in the skies. So anyone who's setting out on the path of enlightenment will be absolutely impeccable in everything that they do. Is it because of fear of damnation? No. Or of the punishment of God, or because I have sinned and haven't got forgiveness? No, no, no. I mean, these are all excuses that keeps us away from the real problem. The really enlightened person will see every action has a reaction with which I must deal. And if I'm wise, I'm not going to do stuff that will cause me to have to face it and resolve it and balance it in my soul later. That's the real criterion.
That God, or the fundamental level of reality, depending on what people describe, it really, I mean, theoretically, it should be everywhere. It's something, exactly how it would manifest or how God would manifest in the world is a more complicated issue. But I think that certainly from a more traditional religious perspective, people have kind of gotten away from God, the person.
There's been a great shift from God up there or out there or in there, wherever, to the God within. And that's an improvement, but we don't want to get some idea that God can be within and still be separate, which is what most people think. They think the God within is like some of those alien movies, you know, where some being breaks out from my chest. God is not within in that stupid sense. What it means is that in God we live, move, and have our being, that we ourselves, in fact, are divine.
What's the relation between my God self and your God self? There is no relationship because there's only one God self. It's in both of us.
All people are divine people. Is it not ironic that all would say that this is the voice of the devil or that this is heresy? If this is heresy, then what is promised to everyone is an imbuement with God that is inseparable.
Knowledge allows the brain to begin to become wired, and we will begin to see what has always existed, but because we live in those routine automatic programs, we're unable to see because we're processing mind from the familiar. To learn knowledge means we're learning new things, and to learn new things means we're gathering information and creating the circuitry now to begin to develop the sensitivity, to begin to see things for the first time.
There is enormous potential to change the kind of behaviors and characteristic patterns that we've fallen into. In fact, if you've listened and have remembered anything that I've said, your physiology is different than it was before that. That is something that Eric Kandel, the recent winner of the Nobel Prize in Medicine and Science, said very eloquently at a talk, that basically memory has been encoded, your genetic structure has changed, and while we previously would talk about the nervous system as this very rigid thing that didn't have much capacity for change, we now know that on many levels that isn't true. And actually there's a tremendous amount of plasticity, which basically means ability to change within the nervous system.
And if you look at the structure of the human brain in detail, you see that it's specifically designed, it's carefully engineered to experience the unified field, to experience the unity of life.
We're all connected. I mean, I think the most fundamental thing is we're all connected by an energy field. We swim in a sea of light, basically, which is the zero-point field. And I say, first of all, you get away from the whole idea of separateness, because separateness is the biggest problem of the world now.
You take this notion of an entangled universe and you apply it to human experience, because human experience is part of the universe as well. And then you say, well, let's assume that experience is entangled, and then how would it manifest? And we can start going through ways in which it could manifest. If there's a connection with another mind, we call it telepathy. If there's a connection to some other object somewhere else, we'd call it clairvoyance. If there's a connection that happens to transcend time, we'd call it precognition. If there's a connection in which my intention is expressed out in the world some way, we might call it psychokinesis or distant healing or something of that sort. So you can go through a list of perhaps 12 kinds of psychic experience that have gotten labels over the years, like telepathy. But this is really just the tip of the iceberg.
People ask, why are you so interested in the Planck scale, the very ultimately tiny in terms of spirituality? Because obviously spirituality is out there, it's everywhere. And the answer is that yes, the Planck scale is the ultimately small, but it's also everywhere. Wherever you go, there it is. And because it's holographic, it repeats at different scales, like fractals, throughout the universe.
I would say that what quantum physics is to the 20th century, whatever is going to be the new bridging of science and spirituality, that will be to the 21st century.
We are all creating the future. We are all creating what is outside of us. None of us are innocent in that regard. If there's something out there we don't like, we can't really turn our backs on it because we're co-creators somehow or other. And we have to do the right things to try to get the future that is best for all of us.
We have talked so far about the freedom of our own personal life and quantum physics, that we are freeing and freeing and freeing our reality to ultimate realities. Yes, of course they exist. But after we have accomplished them, what then? What next? When do we make the shift from me to one? When are we the subconscious mind? When are we the knowledge of the one, transpersonal self?
When you start to realize what your true nature is, there is no question, there is no answer anymore. And there is just sudden realization. Now you come back from the rabbit hole and you start to perform in this world of illusion and wonder and magic with that understanding that you're never going to die and you were never born.
Choice by consciousness out of these possible events, the actual event of experience comes in. And so, for the first time, science encounters free will. Consciousness is free because there is no mathematical description of the subject. Only objects can be described mathematically, and only to the extent that there are possibilities. The question still remains paramount: who is the chooser?
Are all realities existing simultaneously? Is there a possibility that all potentials exist side by side?
Welcome to Flatland, a world of only 2 dimensions. Only forwards and backwards, left and right. In this world, there is no up and no down.
I said to Ray, where's Dottie? He said, well, she's out in line. I said,
Where's that from? What the bleep is that thing? Huh?
In this world, the 2-dimensional beings that live here have no concept of 3-dimensional objects. These 2-dimensional flatlanders have no understanding of cubes, spheres, tetrahedrons, or yours truly. From their 2D perspective, my 3D finger looks something like this.
earth is that?
Hello, little circle. Fear of the unknown. Or should I say, not yet known. It's a puzzle. If we see only what we know, how does anyone ever see anything new? The unknown. How do we ever get out of our box? Hello, little circle. Don't be afraid.
Who said that? Where are you?
This is always the tricky part to explain. I'm in another dimension, another space. I am above you.
Never use that word.
What word?
The A word.
Above?
It's forbidden.
Well, what do you think it means?
I don't know. And I don't want to know. You can be severely punished if you use that word. Are you a ghost?
I hope not. I just have a different perspective than you do. I can see things in a way you can't yet.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, okay, you have a safe hidden in your pantry. And inside it, you have 12 coins, a will, and a passport.
How did you know that? What are you? Are you a god?
Well, no more than you. You see, since I am above you, in the third dimension, I can see inside things in your world.
Third dimension? You are a crazy ghost. There's only two. Look.
So, if I were to touch the inside of your stomach, how would I do that?
Well, you'd have to cut through my skin. Otherwise, it's impossible. Stop!
Ready for more?
More what?
Dimensions.
Oh.
Directions.
No. Yes, but there aren't any. More? What will happen to me? What will I become?
You'd have to become it to know.
Okay.
Excellent.
I never knew.
Isn't it funny? That which we are most afraid of is what thrills us the most.
That has the effect of randomizing their X spins, and nothing else interesting happened to them after that. Okay. Good. It's an easy way to get a laugh here.
So you can't ask them their opinion, because you know what they're going to tell you. You're starting to act different. I liked you better the other way. And that's a great sign that you're making a change.
You can edit that, though, if you had to, though, couldn't you?
Not prettily.
Yeah.
Edit it out the fire.
Who can do the Heimlich?
Okay, are we rolling?
ギリシャの哲学者タレスが紀元前前に、言ったように、水は万物の源であるというふうに、私は信じています。
I study quantum physics. I sometimes teach it. I have written a book on quantum physics and many books explicating the meaning of quantum physics.
After my PhD from Harvard, I went to CERN, a European laboratory for particle research, but perhaps I'm best known for the discovery of the now famous N=1 locally supersymmetric flipped SU5 grand unified field theory. Don't make the mistake of thinking that the scientific community is scientific.
2 points. First of all, I want to thank David for healthy skepticism is important, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Now, the problem is that people defending the conventional approach to consciousness, brain equals mind equals computer, behave as if they've got proof and we don't. And they got, okay, pardon my...
Which formed the neural nets in the first place, which is what? The mind. What's the mind? The mind, thank you. This is called divine intervention. From above. But he has feet of clay.
I got involved with this because my evidence... no. Start over. Okay. I can go back and fix that. Okay. Okay. My name is Lynn McTaggart. I'm author of a book called The Field.
I'm Dr. Daniel Monti. I'm a physician with specialty training in psychiatry and human behavior. I'm on the full-time faculty at the Jefferson Medical College.
I've heard some people say that, consciousness is this wonderful property in the universe that has a predilection for the human brain. If that's the case, then consciousness is about 3 pounds and looks a little bit like a gray cauliflower. It's showtime.
Tell you a little about myself. Oh, the light is blinking already. See, this is what happens whenever I speak. Weird things happen. Okay. All right, well, look, when I hold it, it stays on. What does that mean? All right. Oh, it's okay. Maybe God wants me to meet you.
Actually, we did this at a conference when we asked people how many people have had a gut feeling and so on, and 80% of people say. And then they say, among those of you who are very skeptical of unconventional claims, how many of you, meaning now like 30% of the audience who doesn't believe in any of this stuff, how many of you guys have had interesting gut feelings that turned out to be right? 80%. So when people are skeptical about unusual things, it's completely understandable because there's all kinds of nonsense out there. But when you bring those phenomena into the lab and you exclude all of the ordinary ways of understanding them, it turns out that they do have a psychic component.
Here we are actually filming great thinkers. Everyone in this room is a great thinker. Now that we got them thinking, that's always a trick, isn't it?
You probably have more to say about this.
No.
Sorry about that.
Multiple personality disorder have to say about the seat of consciousness. And the second one is, what made you want to become a physicist at the age of 50?
Okay, well, I guess multiple personality disorder. I actually wanted to become a physicist as young as the age of 4, believe it or not.
As we become more and more inner self-managed, okay, we will manifest the qualities of these deeper levels down the rabbit hole. And so we become a Qigong master, where we can influence things from thousands of miles away.
So if we begin to look at all that, it seems to me the only way out that I can understand is there is an intelligent presence. There is a kind of a one-mindedness that I call it, or God, if you want to call it that. Ponder that for a while. What did I say? What are you going to do with that? A bite! You took a bite out of nowhere!
Okay, that's good.